All right, moving out. It's something most of us have done or will do at some point. And one of the key steps is, of course, giving your landlord that 30-day notice. Seems pretty straightforward, right?
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But you'd be surprised. So many people get tripped up on the details. It's really way more than just like scribbling a quick note and hoping for the best, you know?
Yeah, for sure. That's exactly why we've got this whole stack of expert guides and legal advice to help us, well, help our listeners really break it all down.
Exactly.
So to kick things off, why is this notice such a big deal? What's the point of it all?
Well, think of it like this. The 30-day notice is a shield, like a legal protection for you. But it's also a courtesy heads up for your landlord, you know? Gives them time to find a new tenant.
Right.
And the thing is, without it, you risk running into a whole minefield of financial and legal issues.
Okay, so it's not just about getting your security deposit back then. Like, what kind of trouble are we talking about here?
Well, imagine having to pay rent even after you move out.
Oh, that's no good.
Or even worse, dealing with lawsuits.
Yeah, nobody wants that.
No. And not to mention, a poorly handled notice could really damage your chances of renting a decent place in the future.
Yeah, that's definitely not the kind of baggage you want to be carrying around when you're apartment hunting.
Exactly.
So most leases I've seen say 30 days is the standard, but our sources mention that there can be some twists and turns. What are some of the things listeners should be watching out for?
First and foremost, never assume anything. Always, and I mean always, read your lease super thoroughly.
Okay, good advice.
Because some landlords might require a 45 or 60-day notice, and some even go as high as 90 days.
90 days? That's like forever in moving time.
It can feel that way, yeah.
Wow.
And don't forget about local laws, especially if you're on a month-to-month lease.
Right.
Because those can throw a wrench in the works, too. In fact, some states actually mandate a 60 or even a 90-day notice for those month-to-month agreements.
Huh. So it's really not as straightforward as it seems on the surface.
Definitely not.
All right, so let's say you've done your homework. You've figured out the time frame. What actually makes a 30-day notice official? Like, what needs to be in it?
Well, it has to be a formal written document, not a casual text or phone call. Think of it as an official legal statement.
Okay, makes sense.
You need to clearly state your intent to vacate the property, including your name, the address, the landlord's information, and importantly, the exact date you'll be moving out.
Gotcha. And I noticed one of the sources mentioned using very specific wording like, this notice serves as formal notification. Why is that so important?
That's a great question. Using clear and concise language like that removes any kind of ambiguity. You're leaving no room for misinterpretation.
Right.
You're basically demonstrating that you understand the legal implications of this process and that you're handling it professionally.
That makes a lot of sense. Anything else that absolutely has to be in this notice?
Oh, don't forget your forwarding address. This is crucial for getting that security deposit back. And be sure to double check that it's correct and that it's legible to avoid any delays or disputes down the road.
Good point.
Oh, and always keep a copy of the notice for your own records.
Yeah, documentation is key.
It really is.
So we've got the content nailed down. What about actually getting this notice to the landlord? Does just dropping it off in their mailbox work?
Not quite. It's all about proof of delivery. You need to be able to demonstrate that your landlord actually received that notice, and a simple mailbox drop doesn't really guarantee that.
Okay, fair enough. So what are the best ways to make sure there's no question they got it?
Well, personally, delivering it and getting a signed receipt is the ideal scenario. But let's be real, that's not always possible. So, certified mail with a return receipt requested is a really solid alternative.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, this way you have official documentation from the Postal Service confirming they got it.
And what about email? Is that acceptable these days?
It depends. Some leases specifically allow for electronic communication, so in those cases, email is usually fine. However, it's super important to keep a copy of the sent email with the timestamps, just in case any disputes arise later on.
Good point. It's all about covering your bases.
Exactly.
So you mentioned disputes earlier. What if a landlord tries to say they never got the notice? Like, what happens then?
Well, that's where your proof of delivery comes in handy. It's basically your word against theirs. And having that solid documentation can be the difference between a smooth move out and a messy legal battle.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So it's really better to be safe than sorry.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's like that old saying, paper trails save tails. Speaking of potential headaches, what happens if a landlord refuses to accept a 30-day notice? Can they just say, nope, not taking it, and keep you on the hook?
Oh, that's a good question. I imagine there are laws around this, right? Like they can't just ignore it.
Oh, absolutely. In most cases, a landlord can't legally deny a valid 30-day notice, especially if it's been delivered properly and it follows all the terms of your lease and, of course, local laws.
So it's not like they can just like rip it up dramatically and call it a day.
Not quite, no. But things can get a bit trickier if you're trying to break a fixed-term lease early.
Right, right. Because in those situations, you're still legally obligated to pay rent for that entire lease period, even if you move out before it officially ends.
Exactly. So in those situations, a landlord might have, well, they might have grounds to hold you responsible for those remaining rent payments, or even, pursue other penalties as outlined in your lease agreement.
Oh, yikes. So if anyone out there is considering breaking a lease, consulting with a lawyer beforehand is probably a really smart move.
I would definitely agree with that. It's always better to have, professional guidance in those situations to understand your rights and obligations fully.
For sure. For sure. Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit and talk about some common mistakes people make when giving their 30-day notice. What are some of the things that trip people up?
One of the biggest blunders is simply not giving enough notice. People miscalculate or they forget about weekends or holidays, and they end up, shortchanging the required number of days.
Right, right. And I bet forgetting crucial information is another big one.
Oh, you nailed it. Leaving out your forwarding address is a classic. And as we discussed earlier, that can have some pretty significant consequences, especially when it comes to getting that security deposit back.
Yeah, no kidding. So triple checking everything is essential. Any other pitfalls we should warn people about?
Relying on verbal agreements or casual communication like texting. It might seem convenient in the moment, but when it comes to something this important, you need a paper trail. Always get everything in writing.
Okay, so written notice, proof of delivery, double-checking all the details. We've covered a lot of ground here. Are there any situations where this whole 30-day rule doesn't apply?
There are a few exceptions, yeah. For instance, if you've only lived in a place for less than a year, some places might only require a shorter notice, like a week or two.
Interesting. Are there other situations where you might be able to give less notice?
Well, if a landlord has significantly breached the lease agreement or neglected their responsibilities, you might have grounds to terminate the tenancy with less than 30 days' notice.
So, like, if the place becomes unlivable due to the landlord's neglect, you might have some recourse.
Exactly. But this often involves navigating legal procedures, so it's always best to seek professional advice if you find yourself in that situation.
Solid advice. It seems like giving proper notice is just one piece of the puzzle when it comes to a smooth move out. What else should people be thinking about?
Don't forget about paying your last month's rent. Just because you're moving out doesn't mean you're off the hook financially until your official move-out date.
Right. Rent responsibilities don't magically disappear. What about prorated rent?
Yeah.
That seems to confuse a lot of people.
It definitely can, yeah. Prorated rent essentially means you only pay for the specific number of days you occupy the unit in that final month. So if you're moving out on the 15th, you only pay for those 15 days.
That makes sense. So always check your lease or have a clear conversation with your landlord about how they handle prorated rent, just to avoid any financial surprises.
Exactly, exactly. And once you've got the rent situation squared away, make sure to forward your new address to your landlord as soon as possible. This is essential for receiving that security deposit refund without any delays.
Yeah, one source even suggested sending your new address, even if it's not finalized when you first give your notice, just to be extra safe.
Being proactive is key, especially with something as important as your security deposit. And speaking of which, it's important to remember that you're not always guaranteed a full refund.
Right, right. Normal wear and tear is one thing, but damage is another.
Precisely. Landlords have the right to use your security deposit to cover the cost of repairs or cleaning if necessary.
So how can someone protect themselves and try to get as much of their deposit back as possible?
The key is documentation and communication. When you first move in, carefully document any existing damage to the property. Take photos, videos, whatever you need. This establishes a baseline.
So you can prove that the damage was already there when you moved in.
Exactly. And if any damage occurs during your tenancy, report it to your landlord promptly. This shows you're taking responsibility and not trying to hide anything.
Good advice. What about when it's time to move out?
Clean the unit thoroughly. I mean, sparkling clean, like you're trying to impress your mother-in-law. And take photos or videos after you've cleaned everything. This serves as evidence of the condition you left the property in.
That's a great tip. It sounds like all of this boils down to clear communication and documentation throughout the entire tenancy.
Absolutely. A little effort up front can save you a lot of stress and potential disputes down the line.
We've talked a lot about the practical and legal side of things, but one source brought up something I found interesting: the human element. They suggested expressing gratitude in your notice.
Oh, that's an interesting point. It might seem small, but a simple thank you can go a long way. It reinforces the idea that this is a professional relationship and you appreciate the opportunity to have rented their property.
Yeah, I get that. But some people might think it's unnecessary, especially if they didn't have the best experience with their landlord.
I hear that, I do. It's not about being overly effusive or ignoring any issues. It's about maintaining a professional and respectful tone, even as you're moving on.
Because ultimately, you want to leave a positive impression, right?
Exactly. It can impact your future rental prospects. A landlord who remembers you as a responsible and respectful tenant is more likely to give you a good reference down the line.
And a good reference can be invaluable when you're trying to secure a new place.
It's like a stamp of approval, validating your reliability as a tenant. And building a solid rental history is something that benefits you in the long run.
It's like building credit, but for renting.
I love that analogy. Just like a good credit score can open doors financially, a positive rental history opens doors to better housing options. And giving proper notice, handling things professionally, and leaving on good terms all contribute to that positive track record.
Wow, it sounds like even this one seemingly small act of giving a 30-day notice can have a ripple effect far beyond the immediate move.
It really can. It's about building a reputation as a tenant who understands their responsibilities, communicates effectively, and respects the agreement they've made.
So next time you're preparing to move, remember that giving your landlord proper notice isn't just a box to check. It's an opportunity to demonstrate your professionalism, build a positive relationship, and set yourself up for success in the future.
Beautifully said.
Yeah, it really highlights how even these seemingly small actions can have a pretty big impact down the line. We've covered the notice itself, but there's more to ensuring a smooth exit, right?
Oh, absolutely. Think of the notice as just the start of the conversation. You've signaled your intent, but now it's really about tying up all those loose ends responsibly.
So what are some of those things that people often forget about or, let slip through the cracks?
One of the big ones is properly documenting the condition of the property before you hand over the keys. It's amazing how many disputes arise later from disagreements about damage or how clean the place was.
Yeah, we touched on documenting pre-existing damage earlier, but what about, right before you move out?
Think photographic evidence. Go through the entire unit, room by room, taking clear photos or videos of everything. Floors, walls, appliances, fixtures, the more detailed, the better.
So if the landlord tries to claim you damaged something that was already there, you've got proof it wasn't you.
Exactly. It's your protection against unfair deductions from your security deposit.
Which, speaking of, what are some tips for maximizing that deposit return? Because I know that's on everyone's mind when they're moving. It's like a bonus you're hoping to get back.
Right, but it's not a lottery. You can dramatically increase your chances by understanding what constitutes normal wear and tear versus actual damage.
Can you give us some examples? I feel like that line can be pretty blurry for a lot of people.
Sure. Think about it this way. Lightly scuffed paint from, normal use, that's wear and tear. A huge hole punched in the wall, that's damage. A few small nail holes from hanging pictures are usually fine, but an entire wall covered in adhesive strips, that might be a problem.
So it's really about being reasonable and understanding what goes beyond just everyday use of the space.
Exactly. And if you're ever unsure about something, it's always best to, err on the side of caution and just ask your landlord for clarification. Open communication throughout the whole process can really prevent a lot of misunderstandings and potential disputes down the road.
That makes a lot of sense. Like we said earlier, it is a relationship, even if it's a temporary one.
Absolutely. And just like any relationship, ending it on a positive note can have its benefits. Remember that final thought from our sources about expressing gratitude in your notice?
Yeah, that really stuck with me. It seemed like such a simple but powerful gesture.
It is. It's about recognizing that even in a legal transaction like renting, there's still a human element involved. A simple thank you for the opportunity to rent your property can leave a positive, lasting impression and just reinforce your professionalism.
And who knows, maybe that positive impression could even translate into a glowing reference down the line when you need one.
Exactly. You never know when a previous landlord's recommendation might be the deciding factor in you securing your next great place.
So it seems like we've come full circle. This whole process of giving a 30-day notice, it isn't just about following legal procedures, it's really about setting yourself up for success as a renter in the long run.
I couldn't have said it better myself. It's about understanding your rights, communicating clearly, documenting everything, and leaving a positive impression. Being proactive and responsible ultimately benefits everyone involved.
Well, I feel like we've thoroughly unpacked this topic. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and insights with us today. This has been so helpful.
My pleasure, truly. It's always a good reminder that knowledge is power, especially when it comes to navigating something as important as housing.
Absolutely. And to our listeners, we hope you found this deep dive insightful and helpful as well. Remember, we've got those additional resources in the show notes if you want to explore further.
And as always, if you have any specific questions or situations you'd like to discuss, don't hesitate to reach out to a qualified professional for personalized advice.
Fantastic advice. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you on our next deep dive into a whole new topic.
Call now 714-442-9741. Thank you.